I pointed out to him we have significant cyber capability, and he knows it. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but it's significant. And if in fact they violate these basic norms, we will respond. Cyber. He knows, in the cyber way. Number two, I think that the last thing he wants now is a Cold War.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis. Listen, please share this podcast with your friends. We need to grow and appreciate your support. The Russia-U.S. summit in Geneva. U.S. President Joe Biden told Russian President Vladimir Putin that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to cyber attacks. But analysts said his efforts were unlikely to be more successful than previous attempts to carve out safe zones online. In other words, the Russians are going to keep hacking. Biden wasn't explicit in his news conference, but he spoke of 16 kinds of infrastructure, an apparent reference to the 16 sectors designated as critical by U.S. Homeland Security Department, including telecommunications, healthcare, food, and energy. Did Putin get the message? Sure he did. But will it change anything? On this backstory, a former FBI cyber expert walks us through the field of hacking and cyber warfare. Oh, and change your password. All right, Ammar Barghouty is with the Soufan Center, which is an independent research and analysis center, and he heads up cyber practice, and he joins us from Doha, Qatar. Hi.
Hi, Dana.
So your background's pretty amazing, and so I want to mention it before we talk about all this, if you don't mind. But you worked in the FBI field since 1999. You were a field agent. You were posted all over the world on counterterrorism missions. In 2013, you were assigned to the Washington Field Office of Cyber Human Intelligence, spotting, assessing, recruiting of confidential human sources in the cyber arena. And you were also program manager responsible for computer intrusion threats from terror organizations and ran cyber intrusion investigations across several FBI offices. So it's really impressive. And I want to ask you to begin with, I mean, Ammar, given everything that we're seeing in pipeline hacking, the massive hacking of the U.S. government systems in December, which was called SolarWinds, it would seem that we're in a cyber war right now.
Well, I don't think we've ever not been in a cyber war, but it's just the intensity is definitely gone up.
And we seem to be on the losing side of that war, because we failed to secure even all our critical infrastructure, and month by month and increasingly week by week, we seem to be so vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, I think we seem to be more on the losing side. One of the big reasons is we have the largest surface area to attack. We're a very connected country. But you're right, in terms of the security, if you look at just the Colonial Pipeline, just some basic cyber hygiene probably would have mitigated a lot of that, a lot of what happened there. As it's understood, the attackers came in using a reused password that was compromised on another site, and Colonial Pipeline wasn't employing what we call multi-factor authentication, which really should be the standard for everything. You know, when you log into your bank and you receive a text message on your phone to continue the login process, so if somebody stole what you knew, your password, they still had to have something that you had, which is your telephone or your token, and that would have probably prevented even that attack from ever happening.
Cyber hygiene, that's a new one for me.
Mm-hmm. It's used a lot now.
But I mean, this seems crazy that you get into, if you're a hacker, you can get into major infrastructure by compromising somebody's password. I mean, surely there are more layers to this than a password.
Well, to be quite honest, a lot of what the hacking is, I mean, we look at, if we're looking at the nation state type hacking or stuff that NSA would probably do, That involves a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of really, really strong savvy to do, when sometimes it's just easy to get somebody's password. It's way easier. If you can social engineer it out of somebody with a phone call or a spoofed email, you make them divulge that information. They open the door for you. And unfortunately, that's kind of how a lot of this works, because why should I do all the engineering? And if somebody discovers it, they can always patch it, when it's a lot easier to get somebody to open the door for me. And a lot of these hacks actually are done that way. Ransomware in particular right now.
The Russians seem to do this as an industry. I mean, what would you say about the accuracy of reports that come not only from the FBI, but the NSA and many others, that, first of all, that the election was hacked, and that GRU, Russian military intelligence, was involved in things like SolarWinds?
Well, in terms of the actual election hacking, I haven't seen anything where it was kind of a technical type hacking versus retrieving the emails of, back in 2016 of the DNC and the whatnot. That didn't need a lot of savvy to do. That was also social engineering. I believe John Podesta's emails, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, was stolen via spoofed email where he tried to verify his Google credentials. But in terms of Russia and the criminal side of things, especially with the ransomware attacks, which is something that we're really being overwhelmed with right now, and the tolerance of the criminals within Russia, I've always seen that the line between probably organized crime or even crime in Russia and the Russian state is pretty blurry, and it's not a very solid or clearly delineated line. A lot of tolerance there.
That's great for denial purposes from the Kremlin, because they can say, oh, they're criminals. It wasn't military intelligence, or it wasn't the FSB, or et cetera.
Absolutely. And that's where also using these lower technology techniques comes in, because if you're using something really high level, something, what we call, if you're coming in with what we call 0-day exploits, basically you find a vulnerability in a system that nobody else knows about. These, we call them 0 days, where different systems, your antiviruses can't pick them up or anything else like that. You kind of associate those with very high level type hacker activity, or even nation state side. But if you want to kind of deny things, you kind of keep it on the lower level, and it works great. There's really, again, like I said, there's no reason to employ the crown jewels of your technical exploits when somebody could, again, just trick somebody into giving you a password, or using, again, a reused password across different platforms. I can compromise a password on one system, and if I know who the user is, and they work in a place that I'm targeting, I could just reuse that, because a lot of folks do reuse it. And again, if we're not using our multi-factor authentication, our text messages or tokens to come in, you're in the system.
I mean, this is all a form of hybrid warfare as well, in this kind of look surprised, act concerned, and deny everything.
Absolutely.
So do you believe Putin's denials that Russia is doing this? I mean, if you watched the summit last week with President Biden, President Putin's news conference dealt extensively with the whole area of cyber hacking. And he says more hacks are coming from America and places like that than from Russia. And he denied it came from the government.
Well, it's kind of funny. Sometimes if you look at certain kind of maps that show where a lot of cyber attacks are launched, they may appear to be launched in America, but you can make it look like they're launched from America. So I think he's kind of using maybe that as a cover, but no, I absolutely do not believe his denials one bit.
So you believe that the security services are doing some of it, not all of it?
I wouldn't say some, but I would say they're looking on and maybe cheering,
organizing.
I have nothing to base whether they're actually organizing it or not.
But that's been the evidence that's been given to Congress, and that some of the organizations of GRU are absolutely involved in the 2016 election. These weren't fringe criminals. I mean, that these were intelligence services.
When we're looking at the 2016 elections, I kind of look at that as a separate thing versus, again, a lot of the criminal activity that's going on right now. Again, Colonial Pipeline and the whatnot. The 2016 elections, no, were from all the evidence, it truly appears that it was directed, supported. The name escapes me. The actual physical location of where these folks were housed was all tied back, I believe, to the Russian government.
But some of them may be from St. Petersburg and elsewhere, but I think there are a number of them. Yeah,
the Internet Research Center, I believe, is what it was called. Was the name of the place. Yeah. But also a lot of the disinformation was kind of coming out of there, which it's not necessarily my expertise. I'm more on the intrusion side and.
But when you were looking at intrusion threats from terror organizations, what kind of threats?
On a level, I would call the medium low to low. A lot of the terror organizations really, if you take an organization like Al Qaeda, they really distrusted technology. So they had one or two very promising folks there that were kind of shoved to the wayside. ISIS kind of had a lot more technically savvy cadre, but they employed most of those internally to search for spies using basically compromising people's phones. Same thing to look at Iraqi or coalition troop movement by tricking soldiers to download apps that let them access their location and video and microphone going on. In terms of like attacking the West, it was very aspirational, and they did look at I believe like a water system at one point, but they kind of lack the I'm going to say the expertise on one side. Like even if they got into the water system, they don't have the engineer who knows, okay, which valves do you turn now to make this thing go bad? They didn't have that expertise, and a lot of the really aspiring as I want to call them. Thought leaders were killed before they ever had a good chance of getting somewhere. Others, in terms of doing intrusions, were mostly sympathizers, indirectly tied to folks like ISIS. They tried a lot. They made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of them were caught by a lot of good international cooperation between the United States and friendly governments.
I mean, I asked the question because if we're vulnerable to criminals, which we surely are we not vulnerable to something more than just ransomware? We're vulnerable possibly to terrorists.
It's definitely a possibility. Right now, currently, I think that the threat isn't as high as it used to be. There was a lot of attrition that happened in terms of the technically savvy ranks that were even thought about doing these types of operations. But when we look at ransomware, here's something that I've always said is kind of it's kind of been my fear, that terrorists kind of use techniques that are a few years old, but now with ransomwares kind of getting there. What happens when a designated terrorist organization takes down a city's system and demands money, and then now the city would become funding terrorism if they pay the ransom or they lose all their files? That's kind of an interesting conundrum at that point.
I mean, the Cyberwars attack was 18,000. I mean, I've had to, I read that number again and again. 18,000 organizations, including the U.S. Treasury.
Yes. Yeah. That was definitely closer to the nation state level type of attack. And
how do we stop it? And don't tell me to change my password.
Well, it's going back to the cyber hygiene. So I believe that the issue with Cyberwars was they had their updates placed in a location that was compromised, and then the adversaries were able to slip their own software in lieu of the updates. And as people updated their systems, they were bringing in, the bad code, so to speak. There's ways, absolute ways to do it, and again, it's all just really good habits that need to be developed, especially on things that are sensitive. When Cyberwars, for instance, would put up their updates, they need to also include, and I believe they might have, what we call a hash value. So when I download the update, I will check the hash value of the software that I have against the hash value that Cyberwinds says this is what it's supposed to be. And if they don't match, that means somebody kind of tinkered with the software. It takes a little bit of extra time, and some people, and I'll admit it myself, I've downloaded stuff just for my own personal use where the website would have a hash value, and I've been lazy. I just haven't checked what I downloaded versus the hash value that was there. But I'm not, that important with the things that I was doing.
So it occurs to me that what we're dealing with in American society and a lot of Western societies are probably traditionally what would say in Russia would be government organizations, long ago have been privatized. And you're trying to preach security to civilian organizations and hoping that they get it. Yes.
And a lot of them don't see, and it's unfortunate because, a lot of the organizations, businesses, they're primarily looking at the bottom line and the business processes. And if you ask them to do things, they don't see the return on the investment. It's like buying insurance. You really don't see it until you need it, and you hope you never need it. But a business might see that kind of as an expense. For example, one big nation state, the attack was the WannaCry attack back in 2017. And that was based on actually the leaked NSA hacking tools that was re-weaponized by what the United States and the United Kingdom believe is North Korea. And that spread like wildfire to over 200,000 systems. Luckily, a kill switch was found in it. It was just bad programming on the North Koreans' part. But the sad part is no systems should have been infected because it was only effective against unpatched or older systems that should have never been in place.
What do you worry about when you hear, when you as this evolves, and it seems like it's becoming, really compressed to the point that, look, I've covered Russia-America summits for 2 decades, and cyber concerns overtook nuclear concerns. I mean, it was a much bigger agenda because nuclear concerns are real, but are they an imminent threat? I mean, the thought is no, but cyber threats are an ongoing imminent threat.
Yes, and again, we're far more vulnerable because of our attack surface. With nuclear threats, we had mutually assured destruction. With cyber, now we'll have way more damage than the adversaries will ever have.
And why is that? Just because we have more things online? Most of our industry is online and modernized.
Yes, industry, banking, everything. I mean, just everything is getting to be online, and we just have far more to hit.
What is your nightmare scenario?
Well, obviously, the power going down for 3 months, that would be my biggest, or longer. Just the chaos and anarchy that would happen from that. And again,
I would say that's a good Tom Clancy chapter, but not very realistic. But now, after the pipeline was hijacked on the eastern seaboard of the United States, it's a very real possibility. And suddenly, it dawns on all of us that this is not some kind of abstract exercise that they play with in FBI headquarters or the NSA or the Pentagon. This is real stuff.
Yeah, I mean, with the pipeline, luckily there were workarounds to get the fuel. You can use trucking, you can use all that kind of stuff. But if your generation capacity is blown up, you can't go to Generators R Us and just order one and get it within a week. It takes a year or so to bring those things online. And if you have a whole bunch of them go down, it could hurt.
During the summit in Switzerland, in Geneva, President Biden gave President Putin a list of sensitive no-go areas for hacking, even though the Kremlin denied that they do hacking. But I think there's 18 of them. Or do you think that Putin found that amusing, or what was the mention by Biden of imagine if your oil pipelines went down, which seemed to be a pretty muscular threat to me? Do you think that is enough to dissuade the Kremlin in the future?
Personally, I think maybe it may give some pause because generally the United States doesn't advertise what it can do. From what I've seen, is we kind of hold back the really good stuff, and for the time and place to use it, so to speak. I can't talk about things obviously that I may have come across within the intelligence community in that regards, but when President Biden did say that, I did have a small smile on my face.
Is there capability to fight back, and do you need to do that in cyber warfare?
Directly, I would not know. I would hope so, but same thing. If I did, I probably wouldn't be allowed to talk about it.
All right, I'll let you dodge that one. Is it time for a sea change in how we run infrastructure, companies hold data, and how we protect ourselves? And again, it has to be more than a password.
Well, it's honestly, I think we probably need to regulate some cybersecurity into things. Actually, put some penalties in there. There are best practices that are out there. DHS puts out great publications under what we call NIST. There are absolute best practices out there, and I think we need to probably kind of put some regulations in there where companies could probably face some liability for just ignoring things. Again, to kind of say, hey, you run this, you have to have A, B, C, and D. Some of it is
because you're providing critical infrastructure, or you're part of that critical infrastructure puzzle in Western society. That's really interesting. That you would say, government would say to them, look, if you don't safeguard that responsibility, if you're found to be negligent in not, putting up proper barriers to whoever wants to hold you ransom, you could potentially be financially responsible.
Yeah, what I mentioned with CIS, Center for Internet Security, has beautiful, wonderful numerated controls. Like they say, here's your top 5 controls. Have a way to put that in where, hey, you know what? If you've done due diligence, show that you've done due diligence, that you've actually put these, these top recommendations in. That would indemnify you from future liability, whether either government fines or even shareholders being able to sue you for just kind of ignoring these things. I would like to see maybe a little bit more of that, because that way you can push the boards, you can push the leadership within a lot of these companies to say, hey, you know what, we need to do this. Have it on their annual reports, their annual accounting reports, the annual reports where here's for cyber, have something down there kind of telling shareholders, what are we doing for in terms of cybersecurity? What standards are we meeting? Is it audited? Same thing, part of the audit. Somebody can audit that. That would put some teeth into things versus this whole, hey, you should do this or else, just in case, and they'll cross their fingers.
Is that on the table with companies now?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, should be. You were a field agent in the FBI, so I don't get a chance to talk to field agents very often, but former field agents. But you've seen what happened in the Capitol. In the FBI, there's been a lot of testimony and a lot of evidence from the FBI now saying, well, they did know about some threats online, but the criticism has been that they didn't really flag the intelligence. Some of it was raw, no phone call to law enforcement. Some of it was passed along, but probably not as a priority and not as an alarm. Knowing what you know about terrorism around the world, and understanding now the threat from domestic terrorism in the U.S., are you disappointed with the way the FBI handled some of that information or passed some of it on?
Honestly, I know how their hands were tied based on the laws. The international terrorism laws that we have on the books are extremely strong and solid. Domestic terrorism doesn't face any of that because of a lot of the issues with First Amendment and the whatnot. And I know, for instance, the FBI's Agents Association has been pushing really hard in the last few years for stronger domestic terrorism laws that would allow the FBI to use a lot more of the tools in the toolbox that they have that they're able to use against international terrorism. I saw the transition of the FBI. I was pre 9/11. I was a pre 9/11 agent. I was working terrorism pre 9/11. I was, in Yemen after the USS Cole bombing and various other things. And then I was on the ground in Saudi Arabia right after 9/11, pursuing leads there. But I saw the transformation of the Bureau, how it really transformed. And I'm honestly extremely impressed on the international terrorism side, how well the Bureau has protected the United States. But there's a lot of tools that are available for the Bureau to do that on the international terrorism side. On the domestic terrorism side, not so much.
I mean, that's a big problem, right? Because you can't follow the money. You can't intercept electronic communications very well. You're limited on surveillance. There are so many restrictions unless these groups, like the 3%ers and all of them, are lumped in as illegal organizations or terrorist organizations.
Right, and it's very hard to do with the domestic one, and that's all. I think that's all up to Congress right now.
And it's been done in other countries. I mean, Canada, where I'm from, I know that they have made some of those organizations illegal now.
I believe Proud Boys are illegal there now. Mm-hmm.
Sorry?
I believe that Proud Boys are illegal now in Canada. Yes.
But not in the U.S.
Yeah. We have a lot of, I mean, right now currently have a Congress that refuses to even investigate what happened, much less can you think how much legislation that they passed to combat it in the current state of politics.
So when you sit around with your former colleagues, do you kind of feel this is really a ticking time bomb? I mean, if Congress won't address the threat issue and now wants to bury some of it and say they were tourists to the Capitol, some of the Republicans, we haven't faced this down. So that transition you talked about after 9/11, when the FBI went through, a metamorphosis in terms of dealing with counterterrorism and threats from abroad, they need to do that with the threat from within, don't they?
Absolutely. And again, going back, knowing the tools that we have, it would probably be even very effective against domestic terrorism. There's no language barrier. There's no cultural barrier. There's nothing. Putting undercovers in there is going to be very easy versus putting undercovers in a suspected cell of folks from far away. It would be. I would imagine the FBI with the proper laws would be extremely effective. Going back. Correct me if I'm wrong, all the successful, what we would deem international terrorist attacks within the United States that happened after 9/11 really involved either lone wolves or husband-wife team like San Bernardino, or two brothers like in Boston, things that I can't get into pillow talk. I can't get into two brothers living together or some random guy who decides he's going to shoot up a nightclub. But everything else that involved any type of conspiracy or communication or trying to get people together, the FBI has pretty much been almost 100% at thwarting those. So I have no doubt that the FBI could do extremely well against domestic terrorism. However, the laws need to maybe be tweaked a bit to assist in that.
Ammar Barghouty, great to talk to you from the Soufan Center. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I've enjoyed it. It was my pleasure.
And that's our backstory on cyber warfare. The Soufan Center has an amazing lineup of experts who give great insight on security issues. It's great to be able to talk to Ammar Barghouty. It's one of the reasons I do this podcast, to be able to access some incredible thinkers. By the way, a few times a week now, we put out a newsletter for free, unless you want to comment, and then it's a paid subscribe. danalewis.substack.com. Check it out. danalewis.substack.com. Thanks for listening to Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis, and I'll talk to you again soon.